Welcome to Lisbon, on the cusp of a new dawn. A global empire built on trade and ambition.
On the morning of November 1st, 1755, Lisbon was the fourth largest city in Europe, a metropolis of roughly 200,000 souls built upon hills that descended toward the Tagus estuary. It was All Saints' Day, one of the most important holidays in the Catholic calendar, and the city's churches were packed with worshippers, candles lit at every altar, incense rising toward Baroque ceilings. In less than an hour, everything would change. An earthquake of devastating proportions would shake the earth, followed by a tsunami and fires that would burn for days. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps and engravings to life, shifting perspectives, changing camera angles, and moving through these scenes in ways their original artists never could have imagined. The goal isn't just to look at the past, but to step into it, to walk through Lisbon as it once was, and try to imagine what it might have felt like to stand here in these final moments of a city about to vanish. And if you stick around until the end, we'll compare these same locations to how they look today, to see what time has changed and what still remains. Before we step into the streets of Old Lisbon, it helps to understand how this city came to be what it was that morning. For more than 2 centuries, Lisbon had been the center of a vast maritime empire. From here, the caravels departed that rounded the Cape of Good Hope, that reached India, Brazil, the coasts of Africa, and the Far East. Gold and spices flowed into its docks, and the wealth from overseas had been transformed into palaces, monumental churches, and a court that rivaled any other in Europe for splendor. The great panorama of Lisbon, an extraordinary tile panel now preserved in the National Tile Museum, offers us one of the most complete views of the city before the catastrophe. From the Tagus River, the view extends along 14 kilometers of coastline, showing palaces, churches, convents and homes, but also an entire way of life that was about to be extinguished. This work, attributed to the Spanish painter Gabriel del Barco, allows us to imagine how a bird flying over Lisbon would have seen the city, forcing us to turn around ourselves to take in the whole scene, as if it were God's view of that beautiful metropolis. The Royal Ribeira Palace dominated the banks of the Tagus, its silhouette reflected in the waters of the estuary. For more than 200 years, it had served as the residence of Portugal's kings, ever since Manuel I decided to leave the old castle of St. George and build a new home beside the commercial heart of the city. The King's Tower rose beside the river, housing the famous Royal Library with its 70,000 volumes and the Casa da India, from where the vast overseas empire was administered. John V had invested enormous sums, derived from the gold mines of Brazil, to expand and beautify the palace. The original chapel had been transformed into a magnificent Baroque church, and the complex had gained new wings that made it one of the most impressive palaces in Europe. Adjacent to the Ribeira Palace, the newly inaugurated Tagus Opera House represented the culmination of King Joseph I's taste for Italian art. Designed by the architect Giovanni Carlo Galli da Bibbiena, it had opened its doors on March 31st of that same year, barely 7 months before the disaster, with capacity for 600 people distributed between the floor and 38 boxes. That November morning, the Opera House stood silent, unaware that it would never hear music within its walls again. In its brief existence, it had witnessed 3 premieres, the last one just 2 weeks earlier, when Antigone by Antonio Mazzoni was performed. It was, according to contemporary accounts, one of the most luxurious theatres in all of Europe, a symbol of the cultural refinement the Portuguese court had achieved. From the Terreiro do Paço, the great square in front of the palace, the view opened toward the bustling port. The Ribeira Velha market occupied the space beside the royal palace and served as Lisbon's main market for fruits, vegetables, and fish. A French visitor of the era described it as the best fish market in Europe for the variety of species found there. Women vendors, sometimes in rows of small stalls, dominated the street trade. Sardine sellers, fruit vendors, vegetable sellers, bread makers, and many water carriers and washerwomen. The docks were crowded with ships arriving from Europe, Africa, and the American colonies, unloading goods that would then be distributed across the continent. The Sé de Lisboa, the oldest cathedral in the city, stood upon a hill in the heart of Alfamar. Built in the 12th century after the reconquest of the city from the Moors, its twin fortress-like towers recalled an era when churches also served as refuges against invasion. The original Romanesque building had undergone numerous transformations over the centuries, adding a Gothic cloister during the reign of King Dinis and an ambulatory ordered by Alfonso IV to house his family pantheon. That morning, as in all of Lisbon's churches, the faithful filled its naves to celebrate All Saints' Day, never suspecting that the roof was about to collapse upon them. The Carmo convent rose above Chiado Hill, facing the Rocio, its Gothic silhouette competing in grandeur with the cathedral itself. Founded in 1389 by Nuno Álvares Pereira, the Constable of Portugal, it was the largest Gothic church in the city and one of the most impressive in decoration and architecture. Pereira had donated all his possessions to the convent and had entered as a monk himself, choosing the church as his burial place. That All Saints' morning, the congregation filled the naves for Mass, candles lit for the celebration. When the earth began to shake, the enormous roof collapsed upon the faithful, crushing hundreds of people. The arches that once supported that massive vault can still be seen today, silhouetted against the sky like the skeleton of an extinct animal, a perpetual reminder of the devastation. The Rocio, or Plaza of Dom Pedro IV, was the heart of daily life in Lisbon. The Hospital of All Saints, with its Manueline portico, dominated the square where aristocrats of both sexes strolled in a mingling unusual for the time. A famous monumental fountain, built in the 16th century and crowned by a Neptune sculpted in stone, occupied the center of the space. Travelers of the era described Lisbon as a bustling but also dirty city, with narrow streets where garbage was thrown from windows to the cry of "water below." Stray dogs prowled among the market stalls, and a legion of clerks, notaries, merchants, and friars of different orders mingled in the crowd. The Castle of St. George crowned the highest hill in Lisbon, offering panoramic views over the entire city and the Tagus estuary. Although its period of greatest splendor as a royal residence had ended centuries earlier, when the court moved to the Ribeira Palace, the castle remained a symbol of Portuguese power and a reminder of the Christian reconquest of 1147. Its walls had witnessed the reception of Vasco da Gama after discovering the sea route to India and the premiere of the first Portuguese theatre. That morning, from its battlements, an observer would have gazed upon a city that seemed eternal, never imagining that in minutes it would be reduced to rubble. The Agua Livre aqueduct was one of the most impressive engineering works of the 18th century. Commissioned by John V to solve the eternal problem of water supply to the city, its construction had begun in 1731. The monumental section crossing the Alcantara Valley, with its 35 arches and the largest stone arch in the world at 65 meters high, had already become one of Lisbon's symbols. That morning, water continued flowing from the springs of Sintra toward the city's fountains. The aqueduct would be one of the few structures to survive the earthquake intact, its solidity defying the forces that would destroy almost everything else. In Belém, on the banks of the Tagus, the Jerónimos monastery represented the culmination of the Manueline style, that unique form of Portuguese architecture combining Gothic elements with maritime and naturalistic motifs. Built by order of Manuel I to commemorate Vasco da Gama's voyage to India, the monastery housed monks of the Order of St. Jerome, whose duties included praying for the king's soul and providing spiritual assistance to sailors departing from the nearby Restelo beach toward unknown lands. A short distance away, the Tower of Belém watched over the harbor entrance, its cannons pointing toward the sea, its delicate silhouette reflected in the waters of the estuary. Both monuments would survive the earthquake with minor damage, as if some force were protecting these testaments to the Portuguese Golden Age. The Alfama neighborhood stretched from the cathedral down to the riverbanks, a labyrinth of narrow streets and impossible stairways that preserved the layout of the Moorish era. It was one of the oldest districts in the city, and its location on solid rock would allow it to survive better than other areas when the earthquake struck. Here lived fishermen and dock workers, and women hung laundry between the windows of houses that nearly touched across the narrow streets. Fado, that melancholic song that captures the Portuguese spirit, already echoed in the neighborhood taverns, though it had not yet acquired the form we know today. Imagine for a moment that you could walk through these streets that November morning. The autumn sun illuminates the white facades. The smell of incense mingles with the aroma of fresh fish in the markets. The bells of dozens of churches call the faithful to All Saints' Mass. Merchants open their shops, street vendors hawk their wares, children run between the legs of adults. It's a day like any other in one of the wealthiest cities in the world, a metropolis that has survived invasions, plagues, and previous earthquakes. Nothing suggests that in minutes everything will be lost. At 9:30 in the morning, when the churches were fullest, the earth began to shake. The earthquake lasted between 6 and 8 minutes, long enough for most of the city's buildings to collapse. Candles lit for the holiday toppled onto curtains and carpets, starting fires that would spread for days. 40 minutes later, the waters of the Tagus retreated, leaving the harbor floor exposed, only to return as giant waves that flooded the riverside area. Those who had fled from buildings toward the riverbanks were swept away by the tsunami. Now I want to bring you into the present and show you how these places look today. Thanks for being here, and if you have ideas or suggestions for future cities, share them in the comments. Let's continue. The Praça do Comércio now occupies the site where the Royal Ribeira Palace once stood. After the earthquake, King Joseph I, traumatized by the catastrophe, refused to live in stone buildings and spent the rest of his life in tents on the hills of Ajuda. The palace was never rebuilt. In its place, the Marquis of Pombal designed this monumental square open to the river, which Lisbonites still call Terreiro do Paço today, the name of the old palace, as if the ghost of the royal residence still inhabited the space. The ruins of the Carmo convent remain open to the sky, its Gothic arches silhouetted against the clouds like a permanent monument to destruction. The decision was made not to rebuild the roof, leaving the ruins as a reminder of what was lost that day. Today, it houses a small archaeological museum, but its greatest treasure is the silence that dwells among its ruined walls, a silence that seems to hold the echo of that terrible morning. The Pombaline Baixa, the geometric heart of modern Lisbon, rose from the ashes of the earthquake. Where once there had been a labyrinth of medieval streets, the Marquis of Pombal ordered a neighborhood of wide avenues and uniform buildings, designed to withstand future earthquakes. The Gaiolas Pombalinas, flexible wooden structures hidden within the walls, were a revolutionary innovation in anti-seismic engineering. This new Lisbon, rational and enlightened, buried forever the Baroque city that had existed before. The Aguas Livre aqueduct still stands, its monumental arches crossing the Alcantara Valley exactly as they did that morning in 1755. Of all the structures of old Lisbon, perhaps none better represents the continuity between past and present. Water stopped flowing decades ago, but the arches remain silent testimony to what the engineers of the 18th century were capable of building. The Tower of Belém and the Jeronimos Monastery survived the earthquake, and today are World Heritage Sites, symbols of the age of discovery and of everything Portugal meant to the world. Thousands of tourists visit them every day, many unaware that they owe their existence to the same fortune that destroyed almost everything else. I do really appreciate you watching. Your ideas, input, and constructive feedback really do shape what comes next. Feel free to leave a comment below. Until next time.